In Formula One, narratives often take time to mature, sometimes stretching across entire seasons before they reveal their true significance. The story of Lewis Hamilton's 2025 season with Ferrari has become one of those slowly unfolding sagas, where each weekend adds a new brushstroke to a complex and evolving portrait. At the beginning of the year, the move that shocked the motorsport world, the seven-time world champion leaving Mercedes for Ferrari, was filled with romanticism and expectation. Fans dreamed of a fairytale ending, with Hamilton donning the scarlet red and finally bringing back the championship to Maranello after more than a decade of longing. But reality, as it often does in Formula One, proved to be harsher, messier, and far more demanding than the imagination of tifosi around the globe. The Ferrari SF-25, though not a disaster, was an unpredictable machine, a car capable of flashes of brilliance but equally prone to inconsistency. And Charles Leclerc, the driver who had been Ferrari's golden child for years, was instantly quicker and more comfortable in the new machinery. The first handful of races painted a sobering picture. Hamilton, despite his experience, struggled to adapt to a car built around a very different driving philosophy than the Mercedes machines he had mastered for more than a decade. The gap was clear. Leclerc often outpaced him by 2 or 3 tenths of a second in qualifying, and over race distance, the difference grew even more when Hamilton's discomfort with rear stability and braking zones left him vulnerable to tire degradation. The headlines, particularly in the British and Italian press, were unforgiving. Some called him a fading legend. Others went further, questioning whether Ferrari had made a mistake in recruiting a champion whose peak years were behind him. Hamilton himself admitted frustration, at one point declaring in a moment of despair that he felt useless, and even suggested Ferrari should replace him. For a driver of his stature, such words were startling, almost unthinkable. Yet this low point was not the end of the story, but rather the turning point. As the season progressed, something began to shift. While the raw numbers still showed Leclerc ahead, the gaps were no longer as wide, nor as unbridgeable. Analysts began to notice that Hamilton's adaptation curve was trending upward. In practice sessions, he was finding more rhythm, learning how to push the Ferrari without overloading the rear tires. From the early races, where he was on average more than 2 tenths adrift in qualifying, the deficit began to shrink. By mid-season, statistical breakdowns showed that he was now within a tenth of Leclerc, sometimes even matching his teammates' pace in key sectors. The progression was subtle but undeniable. Where once Leclerc's dominance seemed unquestioned, Hamilton was now lurking dangerously close, ready to pounce if the Monegasque made even the smallest mistake. Observers noted that his driving style was slowly recalibrating. At Mercedes, Hamilton was accustomed to a car that rewarded smooth inputs, where managing the tires through clean lines and progressive braking was the secret to success. The Ferrari, however, demanded aggression, later braking, sharper rotation into corners, and a willingness to live with instability on the rear axle. At first, Hamilton resisted this instinctively, his muscle memory betraying him when he tried to carry his old habits into the new cockpit. But with each race, he seemed to absorb more of what the SF-25 required. He was no longer fighting the car. He was learning to bend himself to it. The turning point that crystallized this narrative came during the European rounds of the season. In Austria and Hungary, Hamilton's pace relative to Leclerc became the talk of the paddock. In Friday practice, he was still finding his feet, but by the time qualifying arrived, he had often closed the gap to within 1 or 2 tenths. In Hungary, in particular, his telemetry revealed something striking. In high-speed corners, Hamilton was now as confident as Leclerc, carrying similar minimum speeds. The deficit remained mostly in the braking zones, but even that was shrinking. By the time the Dutch Grand Prix arrived at Zandvoort, the story had flipped entirely. For the first time all season, Hamilton not only shadowed Leclerc throughout practice but also managed to put together laps that placed him within striking distance in qualifying. It was a subtle but powerful shift in perception. Suddenly, the question was no longer whether Hamilton could cope at Ferrari, but rather how long it would take before he began beating Leclerc on merit. The fans felt this change too. Social media, which had been brutal to Hamilton in the opening rounds, now started to recognize his progress. On forums and in comment sections, fans highlighted how he was improving by 2 tenths of a second every session, slowly but methodically cutting into Leclerc's advantage. One particular statistic made the rounds. Over the first 5 races, Leclerc's average advantage in qualifying had been nearly a quarter of a second. But in the following 6 races, that figure dropped to less than a tenth. To the trained eye, this was no coincidence. It was evidence of a veteran champion refusing to fade quietly into the background, digging deep into his vast reservoir of skill and experience to claw his way back into contention. What makes this story so compelling is not just the numbers, but the emotional undercurrent. Hamilton has always thrived on proving people wrong. At Mercedes, he endured criticism about having the fastest car, about championships won too easily. At Ferrari, he found himself on the opposite end of the spectrum. Suddenly the underdog, battling against not only a teammate who knew the car inside out but also against time, as age and expectation weighed heavily on his shoulders. Yet instead of crumbling, he has shown resilience. He has embraced the challenge, even when the car seemed determined to expose his weaknesses. He is learning, evolving, and reminding the world why he is one of the greatest drivers in the history of the sport. Charles Leclerc, for his part, remains an extraordinary talent, perhaps the fastest man over a single lap in modern Formula One. But even he has felt the pressure of Hamilton closing in. The comfort of having a clear margin has evaporated, replaced by the uneasy realization that the man in the other car is no ordinary teammate. When Hamilton sits just 2/10 behind in qualifying, that gap can disappear with a single mistake, a lockup, or a gust of wind at the wrong moment. In race conditions, where Hamilton's tire management and strategic nous are legendary, the prospect of him running so close to Leclerc raises the stakes even higher. Ferrari, too, finds itself in a delicate position. They brought Hamilton in for more than just speed. They wanted leadership, experience, and the intangible aura of a champion who knows how to fight for titles. If he continues this upward trajectory, the team may soon face the very internal tension they secretly feared. Two drivers capable of winning, locked in an intense intra-team rivalry. As the season enters its second half, the narrative is poised delicately on a knife's edge. Hamilton is no longer the struggling outsider. He is the hunter closing in on his prey. The question now is not whether he can catch Leclerc, but when. The tifosi, who once doubted him, are beginning to dream again. The image of Hamilton in red, once seen as a gamble, is starting to resemble destiny fulfilled. He has not yet beaten Leclerc consistently, but the margins are so fine now that it feels inevitable he soon will. And when that moment comes, when Hamilton finally outpaces his teammate on merit and perhaps even claims a podium or a victory for Ferrari, the story will transform once more, from a tale of struggle to one of redemption. Formula One is a sport built on fine margins, on fractions of seconds that separate legends from also-rans. Lewis Hamilton's journey at Ferrari is a reminder that greatness is not measured only by trophies and statistics, but also by the ability to adapt, to fight through adversity, and to rise again when counted out. Running close to Charles Leclerc, improving race by race, Hamilton has rewritten the narrative of his season. He is no longer just a champion of the past. He is once again a contender, proving that in Formula One, true greatness never truly